So the Bible is a collection of a lot of books written at different times by different people across hundreds of years. And biblical writers always had a target audience. They were writing to somebody. And I think sometimes we overlook this. We think the Bible is like the yellow pages. We have a question, we just go look it up, put our finger on it, and there's our answer. But that's not what the Bible is about. The Bible is a collection of text. And the writer is talking to somebody in particular. Like that Micah passage this morning, God is talking to the nations. I was struck by that because this week on my Facebook page, someone insisted to me that some of the issues facing our nation had nothing to do with religion. Now, that makes me bitten mad, to tell you the truth. The idea that there's an issue that's not biblical, that has nothing to do with religion. I simply responded to my antagonist that all issues are religious issues, and that it is a mistake to try to separate life into the sacred and the secular, because I'm telling you that all of life is sacred. And some preachers are going around the country saying that immigration has nothing to do with the Bible, even though the word immigrant appears 91 times in the Bible. You can go home and check me on that, but I promise you I looked it up for myself. You can always depend that if I tell you something, I may get it mixed up, but it will not be from a lack of doing the research and trying to get across the reality of what we're dealing with. So I really wanted to preach from Micah 6 because this chapter is written to the nations. This is God talking to nations. And I was especially impressed with verse 5. Remember now what King Balak of Moab devised. And I went running back to Numbers 22, and that's where things were so messed up with the nations that God had to use a jackass to get his message across. I love that text. Because God will use anybody, even dumb country preachers like me, to try to get the message across. But I didn't feel any real calling to preach from Micah chapter 6, even though there's that wonderful verse where the nations are called to do three things: do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. That's a full-size sermon right there, don't you think? So there I have it. I sneaked up on you and said I didn't really want to preach from Micah, and I went ahead and preached from it anyway. I'm bad about stuff like that. So now here's my second sermon. 2 for 1. You can't get that everywhere in Peoria. During Super Bowl Media Day in 2014, when the Broncos were facing the Seattle football team, a little boy fought his way through the media throng and came up face to face with Coach Pete Carroll. And he said, "Coach, do you have any advice for me?" And Coach Carroll says, "Wherever you want to go, you just keep battling and fighting and hanging on to what you want. If you keep competing, you know you're going to get what you want." Now, Coach Carroll has put before this young man what I consider to be the Beatitudes of our world. Because I want you to know that we live in a world with two sets of Beatitudes. You got those of Jesus in Matthew 5, which is our text today. And then you've got this separate set of Beatitudes that are out there in the world. And what makes this so hard for us is that we sometimes pay attention to one set of Beatitudes, and sometimes we pay attention to another set of Beatitudes. We ourselves are confused and mixed up about how we are to live out our lives and how our religion is supposed to impact our relationship with the nation and the corporation and with the schools and every other institution that impinges upon what we consider to be our freedom. I think that there are opportunities everywhere in America for you to go and hear motivational speakers tell you how to be leaders, tell you how to compete, tell you how to win, tell you how to be number one. And then there's Jesus. There's Jesus saying that the first shall be last. And that just makes us go, "Oh, how can that be right? That doesn't even sound American." We believe that the first should be first. Because our number one chant is, "We're number one, we're number one, we're number one." So we got two ways that are butting heads with each other here, like two stubborn goats that just keep hitting each other, John Brueggemann has written a wonderful little book that's called Rich, free and miserable, the failure of success in America. And he brings up this set of Beatitudes that belongs to the world. Have you read or seen or listened to a tape or a television presentation by Tony Robbins? You guys know Tony Robbins? He's a self-help guru and a self-made millionaire. And he recently had an article that was online on MSN.com in which he said there was one trait that made people successful. I couldn't wait to click on that, because usually you've got these articles that say there are 20 things that will make you successful, and then you've got to go and hit the button 20 times, and it slides through each one of those slides, and it takes forever. I just won't hit those anymore. I'm not patient enough to deal with that. But here's a guy who promised to make me successful with one idea. I couldn't wait to find out. And so it popped up on the screen. The one trait that makes people successful, he says, is hunger. I looked at that and I thought, are you kidding me? I just wasted 30 seconds of my morning to find out that you think it's hunger that makes people successful. I know people who are hungry. They're really hungry for enough food not to starve to death, and they would not be considered successful. Well, I decided I'd go ahead and take the bait and read what else he had to say. He says, you have to become a master of your ability to turn on your determination, your creativity, your hunger. He is one of the preachers of the world's Beatitudes, the clash of the Beatitudes. So to make it clear to you, I'm going to show you the two sets of Beatitudes side by side. Here's the Beatitudes of the world. I call these... Where was I? Oh yeah, the Beatitudes of success. Because what I hope to do before I'm done is show you that success is one thing and faithfulness is another thing. And that there's a way in which we can be successful in our lives and be faithful to God. But it's not easy, and it's complicated. And some days you'll be confused. So here are the Beatitudes of success. Happy are the ambitious, assertive, pushy people, for they get on in the world and get out in the nick of time with a golden parachute. Happy are the hard-boiled and the hard-nosed. They can hurt others, but they never let life hurt them. Happy are the powerful. They stomp on people and destroy people without consequences. Happy are the slave drivers and the workaholics. They get results and they also get promoted. Happy are those who never give an inch, make no allowances, accept no excuses, never say I'm sorry, never forgive a slight, and do whatever it takes to succeed, even if it's unethical, immoral, and untrue. They will be number one. Happy are those who help themselves instead of helping others. They will be known as the people who know how to get the job done. Now those are the Beatitudes of the world. It's a different set of Beatitudes, and they are offered by a different kind of God. I usually refer to this as the market God. And the market God is supreme everywhere in America, from big-time sports to Hollywood, to too big to fail mega banks, to giant, soulless, bottom-line, bottom-dwelling corporations, to Washington, D.C., to individuals who will do anything it takes to get to the top. Brueggemann in Rich, Free, and Miserable says that the market culture of our society has created a death zone in which our old commitments are eroding and human decency is thinning out. He says that we are living our lives in a death zone, and that all of our main institutions like the school and the church and the family are being threatened by the fact that the corporate God, the market God, has taken over in America and in our world. You can see evidence that this is happening. When one of the major Wall Street investment firms was caught cheating and had to pay a fine, the CEO was interviewed. I read the entire interview. What jumped out at me was that this man looked straight into the camera and said, "We are serving God." I made a note. Which God can he possibly be talking about? It's not the God of the Bible. The market God is undermining the quality of life. And yet, how many people do you know right now who every day live every moment of their life by one of the Beatitudes of the world? The Beatitudes of the world are the opposite of those of Jesus. So let's put the Beatitudes of Jesus up there and see how different they are. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We're not sure we want anything to do with anything that has the word poor in it. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the poor in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. The Sermon on the Mount begins with the Beatitudes. Now you may already know this, but the sermon is the life of Jesus put in words. Jesus is the only person who ever lived whose message was exactly the same as his life. He's the one person who ever completely, consistently matched the way he acted with the way he talked. This is the rhetorical form of an actual life that imitated God's life. And Jesus is not offering you the Beatitudes to make you happy. That's got to be one of the worst mistranslations in history, to take the word blessed and turn it into the word happy. Because that's not Jesus telling you how to be happy, happy, happy and live a sappy, sappy life. This is Jesus saying, this is who you are. You are already these Beatitudes because you belong to me. They are descriptions of the kind of lives that we are supposed to be living. So when it says that we are the Beatitudes, it means that we are the people who show the world what it actually means to live for God. We are God's sacrament to the world. And the Beatitudes require a church. You cannot do this by yourself. The world needs us to live out the Beatitudes of Jesus. Needs us. If we are not living the Beatitudes, the world has no alternative to the violence that is hidden in our fear of one another, our anger at one another. You see, Jesus is trying to show us a new way. Now, just before he preaches the Sermon on the Mount, which probably is a collection of a lot of sermons that he preached, but Matthew chose to squeeze them all into 3 chapters. Just before that, he calls 12 people to be his disciples. One of them was Simon the Zealot. Zealot is just another word for terrorist. Another one was Matthew the tax collector, which is just another word for traitor. A terrorist and a traitor in the same group, called to love one another. Only Jesus could pull that off. I would be concerned if today Jesus tried to call 12 people to be his disciples. If he called one to be a Democrat, that was a Democrat, he'd have to all 12 of them would have to be Democrats. Or if the first one was a Republican, all of the others would have to be Republicans, because God knows that we can no longer get along with each other, not even in the same building. In that institution that should be labeled one flew over the cuckoo's nest, but we still call it the Congress of the United States. They can't agree with one another about anything, even if at night in their secret place they both know it would be good for the country. They're just not going to do it because they're just too stubborn, too ideological. Jesus would have a tough time today finding 12 people that would be different and diverse from one another. But we need a church to live out the Beatitudes. Let's just pick one of them and look at how hard it is to do even one of these. Jesus says, blessed are the merciful. If there's anything this world needs, it's more mercy. One of my favorite writers, his name is Reynolds Price, and he says, I write to elicit mercy towards as much of creation as I can present, and you, the reader, can manage. I preach to offer as much mercy to all of God's creation as possible. I just absolutely love this idea. But I think it's the one thing that institutional Christianity frequently fails to do. Remember Jesus saying, do unto others? Do unto others. Remember God saying, I will have mercy and not sacrifice. Remember God saying, vengeance is mine, I will repay. But among Christians today, we seem so determined to get even, to get revenge, to get vengeance. Not mercy and forgiveness, but revenge and vengeance. Paul echoes the Beatitudes about being merciful in his letter to the Romans. I try to read these verses at least once a week. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought of what is noble in the sight of all. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. If your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. I watched a little video recently in which someone was trying to steal from a grocery store, and he got caught. And so one of the customers asked the manager, "Are you going to call the cops and have him arrested?" He said, "No, I'm not." And instead, he gave him some food to eat because it was obvious that the man was hungry. He said, "Why did you do that?" He said, "Because my faith teaches me when someone is hungry, you should feed them." And I know you really want that person, that manager who fed a person trying to steal from him, to have been a Christian. You really want it to be a Christian, don't you? But he wasn't. It was a Muslim who said, "My religion teaches me to feed those who are hungry." The object of the Beatitudes of Jesus is to create dependence, to force us to need one another. Now that doesn't sit well with us because Americans like to be independent. We have centuries of individualism stuffed into our religious DNA like a Thanksgiving turkey. We've been taught to take care of ourselves. God helps those who help themselves, we mutter. But Jesus says that God helps the helpless. Independence, we cry, and dependence, Jesus preaches. We need one another. And here's why. You can't be all these Beatitudes by yourself. Trust me, I tried it. I gave up in despair. I couldn't do all this stuff. I struggled with just one of them at a time. And then one day it dawned on me. It's the church that Jesus is talking to. You see, Scripture is written to an audience, and the Beatitudes are for Christians only. These are not individualized, universal ethics. These are not things you get to look at and say, "Oh man, that's too hard for me, I give up." This was written to the church. And the way we live the Beatitudes is that we come here on Sunday, and some of you have some mercy, and some of you have a poor spirit, and some of you are mourning, and some of you are peacemakers, and some of you are thirsting and hungering for righteousness, and we all get together and we rub shoulders and share our spirits with one another, and we become the living Beatitudes of Jesus Christ. We do it in the church. This is why you can't live without the church. This is why you need the church. But it's not just in religion that we learn this lesson. Perhaps you've read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Outliers. In this book, he dismantles the illusion that really successful people achieved greatness through intelligence, ambition, and independence. And he says the true story of success has to do with family, birthplace, and birth date. He multiplies examples to show how often there's this dependence that we all have that makes all the difference in the world. He shows how Bill Gates could have never become Bill Gates without a lot of things that happened upon which he was utterly and totally dependent. He attacks the citadel of self-made philosophy, and oh, by the way, he's received a lot of criticism. But I say to you that self-made persons are usually pretty sorry building projects without a foundation to stand when the rains fall and the winds blow. But it's not just in business you find this out. If you were to read the book Full House by the biologist Stephen Jay Gould from Harvard University, he argues that progress is an illusion in evolutionary theory and also in human life. He says that if we don't form symbiotic partnerships with other species, we are not going to survive as a people. Did you hear me? Symbiotic partnerships. It's when two different species do something in the evolutionary process of life that turns out to benefit both species. So in Houston, Texas, there are these trees called mimosa trees. And every year there's this little species of beetle that crawls up into these mimosa trees, goes out to the end of a branch, backs up about 12 inches, and takes the saw on the end of its nose that's evolved over centuries, and cuts a girdle all the way around the end of that branch. And then he makes a little slit and she deposits her eggs. And then when that girdle has been made, it effectively kills that branch, but it doesn't fall out yet. It doesn't fall out until a few weeks later when the March winds blow and the dead branch finally falls out and the larvae hatch out and they eat the dead branch, which is now no longer green but dead enough for the larvae to eat and become full-grown beetles with those little saws on the end of their nose. So obviously this was a good deal for the beetle, right? Oh, by the way, this mimosa tree usually lives about 15 years unless the beetle crawls up in there and prunes it. And then the tree lives to be 125 years old. It's good for the tree. It's good for the beetle. And I'm thinking that if a beetle who's got the brain the size of a pinhead and a tree that doesn't seem to have a brain at all could have somehow figured out how to make a symbiotic partnership that's good for both of them, I got to tell you that I'm starting to worry about what the hell is wrong with humans, who allegedly have large brains and have the God-given sense to figure out how we can not only survive, but how we can prosper. You see, I'm trying to teach you to think like Christians instead of thinking like free, independent Americans who claim to be Christians. Jesus gave us the Beatitudes, and each one begins with the word blessed. Now, if you just came here for the blessing, you didn't come here with a good spirit. Because all the way back to Abraham, God always gives a blessing in order that you can do something with it. You don't get a blessing so you can keep it to yourself. That's wrong. He said to Abraham, I bless you so that you may be a blessing to the nations. Wow, did you get that? Do I need to repeat that? You get the blessing so that you can be a blessing. And God's people are given the Beatitudes so that we can bless the world. We get to bless the world by living out what Jesus has called us to do. We are the Beatitudes of Jesus. Now, a little bit later in the sermon, Jesus is going to say, you are the light of the world. He does not say you have to straighten up and fly right to be a light. He doesn't say if you try hard enough, you'll be right. He doesn't say if you believe all the right things, even 20 impossible things before breakfast, you will be light. He just says it out loud. You already are the light. I'm just asking you to be who you are. The Beatitudes of Jesus. So let's leave this morning remembering the words of Jesus repeated over and over again. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. Now get up out of here and go bless somebody else. That makes all the sense in the world to me. And if it didn't make sense to you, remember, give me a cup of coffee and come tell me later where I was wrong. That's all I got. At least for today.
Let us respond by singing together hymn 371, Have Thine Own Way, Lord, verses 1 and 4. Please stand.
I
into our time of communion, we have one additional announcement from the youth group. There are extra ham sandwiches available if you're interested in an extra sub. So while hunger may not be the key to success, it could be a key to an extra sub sandwich. Every month before our communion, we take a special communion fellowship offering for those in need in our own community. The ushers will come forward at this time.
It is my privilege to invite you to participate in the sacrament of Holy Communion. You are invited to the Lord's table to receive the elements of bread and wine. You are invited to share them one with the other. As in our Baptist tradition, we pass the elements among the pews so that you may say to one another, "This is the body of